Hello, everybody. This is your host, Christian, and today I really have the pleasure to have Rory here with me. Rory, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Christian. Thank you for having me here.
My pleasure. So before jumping into today's topic, you just changed company, right? You moved to Yababa not a long time ago, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like 2 months ago.
How is it going there? I think it's a super interesting company. It's a startup working in, I guess, a super competitive field right now.
Yeah, indeed. Even though, there are like some difference between the quick delivery commerce grocery industry compared to Yababa. So we can talk a little bit about that in the coming minutes. But indeed, like 2 months that I did like this change and actually coming from a public open company to an early stage startup brings like a lot of challenge, but also a lot of joyful and very exciting, I would say, events like in the career. So it was already like a move that I was thinking about to do already like for a couple of time, and I'm pretty happy with this choice.
You see, so I have like one first question. So you recently moved to Yababa. What was your focus during this three, like you said 2 months, right? After you left Marley Spoon for Yababa.
Yeah. So basically, we have like a couple of focus, right? In the last like 2 months, of course, that like the valuation markets changed like quite significantly, like in the last like months. So that brought up like some additional challenge like for the market, but basically, like the main focus is really like to work on the cash management and also like P&L. So understanding quite well like what is like a unit's economics. Understanding what is like the roadmap for profitability, like in the coming months. So like in terms of SEM 1, SEM 2, SEM 3. So everything that actually should be like the core focus of like the companies is basically what you're working like nowadays at Yababa. And also, of course, take into account understanding quite well like a budget for the next like 6 months. Because here is even like a little bit tricky, right? Like previously, many companies work at actually in 3-4 years like plan of budget. We don't see that as realistic anymore, just because so many things are happening across the world, like high inflationary situation environment in many countries, including like European countries, also raising of interest rates like everywhere. So this uncertainty also like brings really big challenge to come up like with long-term budgets. So we're always focused now on delivering 3 months budget here at Yababa, and also of course provide quite a lot of data visualization, transparency like to the management team, making sure that like the business departments have full data to make the correct decisions. And of course, we need to always provide accurate financial figures like to our business partners, including like the shareholders, and being also like in constant interaction with them. And I would say one of like the most important things is really to engage and partner with business teams. Finance cannot be isolated in a silo, right? In an island. To me, finance must interact and must communicate quite well with like the rest of like the company, and that is like our main, let's say, goals here. Of course, that as Yababa is still like a seed level startup, that also brings a lot of challenge in terms of implementing a new finance tech stack to refine like our units economics. So basically, almost building the financing from scratch is one of like the biggest challenge that we have currently here. Previously, basically we had one finance manager who has been actually holding the fort, let's put it like this way, for the previous like 10 months. So he's like a really amazing guy. However, of course, like in a really high volume business, like the grocery delivery industry is one industry that demands a lot of, let's say, work hours and also like resource from our finance department. So it's really important to have a pretty, let's say, understandable view of how like the finance team should look like. So it's really important to implement the creator-like process, SOPs, to make sure that mainly accounting, controllership, FP&A, and financial reporting work. Monthly tasks don't suffer significant change month over month, right? They must be like quite stable. So basically having like the stability on like I would say the core finance team areas, you can go ahead and you can provide like better data and also financial figures on time to the management team and also like to the investors. Okay. And of course, like one of the things that sometimes we are like thinking quite a lot here, like at Yababa, of course, that like the time is really like challenging, like nowadays, due to several reasons, right? Like inflation, like some recession outlook in some countries, in Europe, like in the US, so higher interest rate, less confidence in the customer index. But what you always keep up and thinking ahead is that's going to pass, right? I mean, like the economy is basically based on cycles, and you just believe that is going to pass at some point in the future, and the macroeconomic conditions are going to improve again. So we're really like looking forward here at Yababa is to work and to be ready when like the macroeconomic conditions are going to be better again, and of course create like a much better actually company to work and to manage in the coming months and years.
Yeah, I think I'm old enough to remember the 2008 cycle. And I guess we recover some more from that cycle, and hopefully this is just going to be another shorter one. But I mean, you shared a lot of things. One quick question, like how big is the finance team there at Yababa right now?
So basically, like nowadays, we're like 3 people, including me. So we're planning now to go to 4 by the 4th quarter. And of course, like as soon as like the company scales up, I mean, like the team is going to increase and take over like more responsibilities. But currently we're talking about 3 people and going to 4 until the end of the year.
I guess you need to have a lot of work because the company is like 120 people, I think. And given the amount of business that you have, I see.
Currently we have like 140 people and including a lot of invoices to process, right? So that's like the funny part.
But you're like on the customer side, I think you're like a B2C company, right? So you sell directly to customers. And probably like the settlement, like they pay you by cards. So it should be simplified, the reconciliation process somehow.
Yeah, exactly. I would say that like in a high volume business as Yababa, the main challenges are actually on the vendor side, not like on the customer side, like from a finance team perspective. So basically we apply payment methods like as PayPal, Stripe to conduct like our business as like any other startup in terms of like grocery delivery industry. On the other hand, in terms of course, the vendor side is always like challenging, right? Because many times you kind of work with a pretty, let's say, significant supplier base to work with like several different products. So here at Yababa, we work like with several SKUs, so like the number is pretty higher compared even like to the new kit business. And also with like the quick commerce delivery industry. Okay, we work up to 5,000 SKUs. That brings additional complexity to the business and also like to the vendors management parts. So basically, I would say that is like the area that we spend like mostly our time, and also of course developing like from the scratch the FP&A area, like the financial reporting and also like the investor relations part. Also like takes some time, but I would say these topics are much more. They are not like really time consuming like the accounts payables cycle. So I think that is more or less like the current, let's say, situation like here.
I see. So you mentioned vendors and suppliers. Do you have like a supply chain functions inside the company, or it?
Yeah. So basically, it's not well defined as supply chain function. So basically, operations and commercial they divide like several roles of like supply chain, but definitely you can identify some supply chain roles here and there.
What's really challenging with the AP part? Like it's because it's still low tech. It's because the integration with the suppliers is still pretty hard.
Yeah, so basically we're still like a pretty early stage startup, right? So we're still implementing like our ERP system. So like many things are still being done like in data. So, and we are trying to move like that as soon as possible to the ERP. We are going to use Microsoft Business Central, where it's like a pretty nice solution for like small, medium enterprise. So, I mean, that is going to give us like conditions to move forward and also like have a better visualization about the accounts payables process. Okay. But of course, I would say it's like a step-by-step like process. And what you need to make sure is always like to have an open communication with like the vendors and make sure that every information received by us or sent by us are accurate, right? Because regardless the finance tech stack that you're going to use, what you need to make sure is that the information handled by you and managed by your team actually is correct and is accurate based on like your internal data and also, of course, information sent by the vendors. So that's what I believe, and that's what we are working like nowadays.
So the idea is that implementing the ERP is going to change somehow. It's going to simplify your life and hopefully also the life of the vendors. Is that the right picture?
I hope so. I hope so. But of course, I mean, usually that's like a long way to go, you know, and of course that requires a lot of investments. So many times like the ERP is not, let's say, the magic solution. You also need to have like people on the ground to prepare like the whole finance tech stack, and also like bring some customization on the table. So that's like really important. But of course, that's going to be like a huge help for managing data, not only like the accounts payable side, but also I believe the financial reporting and FP&A process, right? Because I mean, like in the end, the data points, they should be actually connected to each other and not being separated.
I guess that right now for the FP&A, you rely on spreadsheet or you integrate the data.
Yeah, so exactly. So we're still like using Google Spreadsheets. We also have like a plan in the coming months to migrate like to some FP&A tool, but we're still looking into the market now.
Makes sense. So you mentioned a couple of really interesting topics. I mean, we just touched the tech stack part, and maybe we're gonna dig into this a little bit more later. But you mentioned about silos. So about the fact that the finance team should be connected with all the other teams. Is this a problem that you have right now, that you think you have right now at Yababa and maybe also in your previous company? And if so, like what are you doing to help with this?
Yeah, I think usually anything related to the finance team is always like a two-way street, okay? Because many times actually the finance team or the finance department as a whole was seen like as a watchdog, you know, for 100% of like the company's internal controls that brought up, of course, I would say two main issues, both to the finance team and also like the business departments. One is that finance team concentrated a lot of information, where it makes sense, because in the end, the transactions level based work is done by the finance team. On the other hand, it also created a sense that the other teams didn't have the need to control like their expense, like their agreements and so on, because in the end you had like a kind of watchdog protecting like the cash flow, protecting like the expense and so on. So what I believe is basically we should not be 100% like this old, let's say, scheme, this old framework, or even like 100%, right? We should actually meet both sides in the middle and actually empower like the business teams to look at the data and to make like the correct decisions based on their needs. And also the account team needs to kind of find ways to partner better with like the business department and actually find out other like solutions, not only in terms of decreasing the work hours from the teams. Like the finance teams are always, let's say, I have like a free translation Brazil that I like to use, which basically means the finance team many times is just like running against the dog's tail. You know, we are always trying to kind of find, let's say, a solution for problems that are already like there for several months. And why that happens sometimes is always like a kind of $1 million question. No one knows like how to answer that, but that's the reality, right? On the other hand, many times the business department teams, they don't know actually what is going on. Also like with the numbers that actually they are driving, let's say, revenue, COGS, expense, additional outcome to the company, right? So basically, both parties actually should like meet in the middle, and that's something that I really try to bring here, like at Yababa, not only improving business process internally to the finance team, but also giving visualization to people, saying, look guys, that was like the cash flow from the last week, that was like the cash flow in the current month, so please see here below what is happening, what kind of expense you have incurred. The same thing with like P&L, so showing like highlights, lowlights, more details like graphs, explanations, and then people actually are going to start to understand how actually their inputs are really like valuable, and then we can make like business decisions smarter and also like driving by data instead of by good feeling, right? So I think that these two big items that I just described now, of course, they are interconnected, but also I think that, the new finance professional needs to look for different ways of working and collaborating like with different people.
Oh, I think that part was key. Like, something that I understood from what you said is, usually the finance team is like understaffed, so we need to catch up with a lot of work, which means we cannot really focus on the present and on the future. And maybe, that's probably something funders and the boards should think about. And the other trend that you shared is, like finance people, they should be more used to work with data. And that's something that I see. I see a lot of data finance people also be in charge of data inside companies, which is a really interesting trend. Do you have any strategy around that? Or if you would recommend or you need to advise any like new company or startup and, they're just starting out with things, is there anything that you would recommend them to, you need to have this as soon as possible because it's going to help you?
Yeah. I think that's a really good question, right? What would be required since the beginning for any like startup company? I think sometimes when I'm seeing like the numbers and of course reviewing like the financial data, I believe that like a company, for instance, like for cash, should look like your cash flow from a personal savings perspective, right? You have like basically cash outflow, cash inflow, investments, funding. So that should not be like really different from what you're doing. Of course, in a different scale, the money is not yours, of course. But in the end, like there is no magic formula how to calculate like cash burn, for instance. It's always like pretty straightforward, right? So I really believe that before actually people go into data analytics solution, one of the most important thing is, are you sure about like your current numbers? Do you know how much actually you're burning as cash per month? Do you know how much revenue you're making? And at the beginning, I would really like suggest to go like to Google spreadsheets. If you don't know what is happening, to make sure that your assumptions are correct. And after that, of course, going like to data analytics that are going to help you to scale up the business and make sure that, the data that you have input there was correct, right? I think that many times, and that is maybe a kind of, let's say, trick from my previous background. What makes more sense for me is always to make sure that the original data is correct. And then you keep up using like this data into a data analytics tool to make like your data visualization like better, and make sure that like the other stakeholders not involved like the finance team closing also understands that, right? The understanding of the data, the understanding, later we can talk a little bit more about the customer side as well. The understanding of like the metrics are what like really matters. It's not actually what is like behind that, but what actually a specific percentage of increase in CM1 is telling me. That was coming from a specific product margin improvement, or that was coming like from our order, number of order increase. So actually, what was like the root cause from that? So I think that like the data analytics is really great, but the finance teams must make sure that the data that we use to feed like the data analytics are the correct ones. So that I would say is like one of my main inputs, but of course that's also biased by my audit experience in the past that brought me to this conclusion afterwards in my life.
It makes a lot of sense. So, data quality, that's fundamental. And the other thing that you share is you need to to get the basic right. So, I mean, you need to be pretty sure about your cash in and cash out, because that's going to decide whether you're going to close the company or not, basically.
Exactly.
You mentioned something about customer on the customer side. I mean, you're like Yababa is working in the grocery industry. Yeah. I know that margins there, they're pretty low. So I guess a company has to do her best or its best to really protect this margin, actually increase the margins. Is there any strategy that you have in place right now at Yababa to make this happen?
Yeah, sure. We have like a lot of let's say strategy around this topic. So basically, what I believe, like the whole grocery industry, right? The whole grocery industry actually was always marketed by having, let's say, low margins. I mean, if you see like the traditional players, they are not like known for having, let's say, really high like margins as like other companies. So basically, also like this movement of like startups challenging like this market is also like driven by improving like the historical margins that like traditional groups could not break for many, many years, right? So, I mean, many times like traditional retailers, players were like celebrating 1% of increase like in the net income year over year, because that was like a huge improvement in terms of like units economics. So basically here, like at Yababa, we are really like looking forward to, of course, improving like the margins. And that could come like from different ways, right? One of the way, of course, is to get like better deals with like suppliers, is to go and understand better our customer needs, because maybe like we are like just purchasing something that actually the customers don't want, and that generate like other problems for you, like shrinkage, like waste, right? That's like a regular problem for many companies in grocery industry. And of course, I mean, understanding how like your customer base works with like price increase, right? So I think that inflation also like puts a huge pressure on us to kind of make smart decisions. I mean, your customer base is like sensitivity to the price or not? What you can kind of like play around, what are kind of, let's say, strategy you can implement, right? What you're seeing here is basically that like our customer base actually really enjoys like promotion, and we are working like in this direction like many times. And of course, we are trying really like to work with like renegotiations with like vendors to get like better deals, going and like discovering like new suppliers, new vendors that could help us improving like our margins, and of course rolling out like other categories, other like products to increase like the basket size, consequently as well the margin.
Okay, so that's pretty interesting. Okay, so you want to work like you want to have some smart data on top of the customer to improve your margins, and you also said want to work closer and also find new suppliers. And you also mentioned the promotion. So I guess you want to help the suppliers emptying their stocks in some ways.
That's a possibility as well, right? So, I mean, it's a possibility to run like marketing partnerships, like make some arrangements with like consignment and so on. So, like in a grocery business, you have like a lot of options to work around with vendors, suppliers, but also like the promotions should be used like in a smart way, right? How actually you can also manage, let's put it like this way, your like inventory also like with promotions. I mean, and to be honest with you, promotions is something that everyone loves, right? So, I mean, how can we make sure that like your value proposition message is aligned with like what the customer is telling you, and also like make sure that they must get happy, with you. So that's more or less what I believe. Is not only about having a super friendly app, by the way, that we have, and other like, let's say web shop initiatives and other like really nice things, but also what is like the value proposition that the customer is seeing, So basically for me, like finance is also like here to help and to connect the dots, right? It's not only like to point fingers and request like to improve the margin, but actually we are here to help you and also apply a customer-centric base. Because in the end, what like the customer wants is like what matters, and we are going to make sure that like this wish is fulfilled by not only finance, but also like by the business teams.
I want to ask one last question, I think, about the supplier.
Sure.
And then I think we can talk about the expansion. So you really want to have a closed loop with the supplier. Do you think that the current supplier, are they receptive to, okay, we want to work with your startup because we want to also innovate because we've been in this market as a distributor, as a supplier for many years, and the way of working is pretty much the same. You get your terms, you order the things, and
yeah. So basically, it's really challenging. Let me maybe include here like a retrospective, right? So as I was working at the Marley Spoon before, I was also used to work with significant, let's say, suppliers in Australia, US, and Europe. Moving to Yababa, what I have seen as the biggest difference, of course, are payment terms. So basically the payment terms in an early stage startup is much shorter. What puts you sometimes always on pressure to make payments. So that's something that we are working nowadays to kind of solve. And to be honest with you, that's one topic that sometimes we need to be creative. So what I mean about creative is not being creative about the cash allocation. It's just being creative actually about how we manage these topics, right? So basically making sure that, for instance, the vendors are going to get the money at the due date. So how we can do that in Europe? We can provide them direct debits, mandates, for instance. So then they are going to give us 2-3 weeks of payment terms, knowing that once the due date arrives, basically they just apply and they just direct debit from us. Other topics, we can find suppliers that accept credit cards, and then naturally you already have the credit line from the supplier. Of course, that is always a little bit challenging when you're talking about the food vendors usually, because also they have really short payment terms internally. So you need to play a little bit with market power that usually early stage startup doesn't have, right? So it's always, let's say, a kind of game of negotiation, of creating, let's say, a good relationship, thinking also about the future, right? So the idea, of course, is always to scale up the business, and we need to make sure that the method is clear together with the vendor. Look, you're building up something here for the next 5-10 years, and that is going to mean that we are also going to receive rewards from that early partnership that you have with us. So I think that is a little bit one side being creative, how you can improve your payment terms, and another way also building great and strong business relationships, with vendors. And of course, once you get it stronger and stronger, you start to have access to not only wholesalers, let's say vendors, or with small vendors, but also you can get in contact with big suppliers that in the end is going to improve your payment term, is going to improve several other factors for our procurement, let's say, sides.
You mentioned about being creative, but you didn't mention banks. So I guess it's something you're not looking into, getting credit on your supply chain or finance your supply chain in any way.
Do you mean credit lines, overdraft amounts, this kind of things?
Yeah.
No, I think that one, actually, to be honest with you, that is one of the last alternatives because you're going to pay interest on top of that. And usually overdraft amounts are usually also a bad sign to the investors. So I'd say, to be honest with you, that's the last resort that we would use.
It's not a competitive way to manage your...
No, I don't think so. We have some discussions about credit lines. If credit lines could improve business relationship and payment terms with specific vendors, but this is still a pretty, let's say, embryonically discussion. But to be honest with you, nowadays we are using the bank, of course, to pay vendors that we cannot kind of postpone more in terms of having better payment terms, but we are not planning to use vendors payments using overdraft or credit lines facilities. Because even, we need to also think, right, that's going to be sustainable or not in a long term. The vendor payment is something that actually is your regular and recurrent transactions. platform. So how are you going to change like that, right? It makes sense or not? So for me, I would say from a cash flow management, the overdraft is always like the last resort.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Also, you're building a relationship with your vendors. So, yeah, I think it's key to build them on like strong foundations.
Yeah.
I was checking Yababa website before, and I see you're active in many in many German cities right now. And I guess you also plan to expand to Europe. I mean, to the rest of Europe sooner or later.
Yeah. So basically, we are live in 6 cities in Germany. So basically, we are live like in Berlin, Cologne, Düsseldorf, Essen, Bonn, and Duisburg. So basically, like this year, of course, like the macroeconomic conditions create like some challenge for international expansion. So at this point, we don't have like any plan to go international like to other countries in Europe. But of course, that doesn't change like our main goal to become like the market leader for multi-ethnic grocery delivery industry in Europe. However, like this year, I don't believe that we're going to go abroad. However, it doesn't change the fact that we can expand to get of Germany, right? Germany is like the most powerful, the most like rich country like in Europe that contains a significant percentage of immigrants in the population base, right? Germany is around like 20%, and many of them actually are looking for products that we sell. So basically, the expansion is going to happen like inside of Germany, and that comes like from different perspectives.
I have a question related to your experience at Marley Spoon. So you were in charge of global accounting there. So I guess this is the kind of experience that also you want to bring, or that you're bringing at Yababa. Is there like any advice or something you want to share with like companies that are now approaching like a global expansion? In the way in which the finance team should approach this, like things that they should like look for, things they should be extremely careful about? Yeah.
So basically, yes, I was like the global head of accounting over there, what basically means overseeing the accounting practice across Europe, US, and like Australia. Okay. And of course, as accounting also needs to give like to the financial reporting team almost like the raw data to work with like the financial statements, with like the financial reporting. I was there like many times also helping like my colleagues. So basically it was what I did like previously. So basically, yes, I believe that like nowadays actually data is one of like the most important things for like almost everyone like in the finance team. And to me, what is also like more important actually is how to manage the data, right? A couple of things that you see like the market, also like talking to colleagues from other companies, is how actually we save time processing like data, understanding the data, and getting like the data insights, right? Because many times people are just like draw in terms of let's say meetings, in terms of like internal discussions, and that creates like a lot of challenge like for also like the managers to take decisions, right? So the data is more than ever like important to understand that. But again, that doesn't stop us to require to understand the basics before actually we go to the data analytics and see what is happening. The finance professional nowadays, I see a really high demand in the markets. So you have like several, new skills coming up. So, but of course also, I think that like what people need to think is that it's really important to keep understand the data, right? To keep understand actually the basics. So a couple of things that I have seen like mainly at the beginning of the year, like last year, when we had like a lot of, let's say, recruiting process at the Marley Spoon, was actually how people didn't understand actually the basics. So what I mean about that, like accounts payables process, like how like the accounts payables work, right? The credit and debit, at least. I mean, how it works. It's not really about what the tool is doing, but it's really about actually what are your understanding, behind the platform working. You don't need to be an expert about like knowing 100% of the tax laws, but you need to have like a good understanding about actually how you're going to see this data like later. So for me, as a finance manager, what I always like look forward is to see who can grasp, who can actually identify, not only that the tool get like a document here, process there, and then goes like to approval. No, actually, what is behind that? When you process like one invoice, actually where this invoice is going to go. I mean, even like in terms of expense, in terms of P&L, you don't need to be an expert, let's say, in terms of financial reporting, but actually just have like a good understanding. I mean, it's going to go to the P&L at some point, right? So, I mean, where is it going to be? If it's a Facebook invoice, I mean, that should not go to the marketing expense or maybe like somewhere else, like in the P&L. I mean, that is basically like my recommendation, my suggestion, like people also like to understand.
Do you mean with that people should be more aware of what the company is actually doing? Like you're not just managing documents. You really need to understand like the documents that you're managing.
Definitely.
Okay.
So definitely, yes. I think that like understanding of company business is still one of like the biggest requirements in the finance world. And of course, different requirements are different across different, let's say, levels, right? So of course that you should not expect like from a new joiner, like a new entry-level position to understand 100% of the transactions. But I think it's always nice to read a little bit about the company, take like your own conclusions about like how the business model works more or less. And of course, ask questions, I mean, no one is the owner of the truth, but you are like super actually welcome to ask like questions like to people and actually sometimes even like challenge, the managers. Look, I saw A, B, C, and D, but Rory, or Christian, how can I see that like the P&L? I'm not seeing that, or like I'm seeing like your announcement like in the investor relations website if the company is public. Can you explain me a little bit, like how does it work? So I think that are always, let's say, welcome. In terms of like finance management side, I really believe that new skills are being required more and more often. Of course, that CFO have like different profiles of CFO around like the market. You have like really traditional like CFOs that are focused on like accounting, controllership, and financial report. You have like other CFOs that are more strategical and business partnership like CFOs. You have like others who are like in the middle. So, I mean, just define who you are and try to kind of hire like people who are going to fill out the gaps, right? So basically, what I did here at Yababa as the head of finance, I wrote, for instance, like one of my friends who I worked at like 8 years ago in Brazil to kind of work with us as the accounting and FP&A manager because I knew that he was going to help us like quite a lot, So that is also like something that I really appreciate to do. And I think that people needs also like to understand that once they take over like new challenge, if they see some needs like in their, let's say, teams, actually it's not really to be afraid to say, look, I need to get like this person, I need to get like this specific profile to, to fill out like one vacancy, one position, I think.
Do you think there is a gap in the market about the people that like companies like Yababa or startups in general are looking for their finance profiles, like skills that maybe they're missing or lacking?
Yeah, I think that one of like to be honest with you, like two main points I have identified like my previous years, doing a lot of recruitment process like in the US, in Europe mainly. One of them is communication. So to me, the finance professional must be also a good communicator. That was not a reality like many years ago, right? I mean, finance was always isolated island, as I said before, was always like a bookkeeper, the watchdog, like the person who was always like complaining, oh, you overspend. Can you give me like explanation for A, B, and C? I don't think that's going to be like the role anymore, like the profile. Actually need to evolve. And the evolving for me actually comes from being a really great communicator, connecting the dots, and actually coaching like the team as well. So maybe I would say like these three main characteristics are going to be like really important, right? The finance professionals usually are really good at raising questions. And sometimes I really go and I talk like to my colleagues here, to the management team sometimes, guys, sorry, I'm going to ask you a really dummy question, Excuse me for that, but why B doesn't connect with B? Can you explain me that, So So this kind of questions actually a finance professional can ask, because also understands like how the, let's say, is a document flow in my head, it's like a flow chart. So if you do A, you're expecting to receive B, and there is like a D in the middle. So how can we identify that, and how can you make sure that things are, let's say, connecting, like between both of them. And another one, I said two, right? I already spent some time explaining like the communication part, but also I think that's about actually technical knowledge in a way that you must understand the basics. Okay? If I'm hiring someone for a senior position, this person should be able not to challenge me, or not like saying, look, Rory, you're wrong in everything that you're doing, but actually they should be able to challenge me like in some specific degree of like technical knowledge, saying, look, what you're doing maybe doesn't make sense. Can you explain me why? That's what I'm expecting to see like a senior, like a manager level. And many times actually people, for several reasons, and to me, honestly, is because they don't read like the company financial statements when they are public, and also they don't read about the company. They don't ask questions that could actually be a differentiation for them, like the hiring process. So for me, these are usually like the two topics that are missing, being like a really great communicator, and also like missing the understanding of the business, the understanding of financial statements many times, to really become like a better professional, because in the end, it's really about understand the business, right? And really like talking to people. So basically like these are like the two features that I see like mostly people missing on this.
I guess a lot of people like finance manager or people that work in finance, they still have this idea of just being a bookkeeper, which is I just do my job and I don't ask questions.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And one of the things that you need to think about it as well, as I worked at audit function, right, for 7 years at Deloitte, is also how the new generations are coming to the markets. The big four firms already like raised several flags, not only in Brazil, not only in the US, but also in Europe. That they're going to face some workforce shortage for several reasons, right? For monetary reasons and etc. But also how this new generation of professionals are going to come into the markets, right? So that is like a pretty big challenge for the market the coming years. Like the number of like students in finance, like in management, in economics, are decreasing quite a lot, like everywhere in the world. So basically that creates like some challenge also like for the finance departments moving forward, because the coaching on the job is going to be more important than ever, right? And many times actually companies, corporations, they are not used to do like coaching on the job differently from big four firms, because it's just like different structures, different, of course, business models, but they need to balance out like to themselves. So, let's see how it's going to be, but also I think that the human capital is going to be one topic that the finance leaders as a whole need to think like in the future.
I think that was a great way to close the interview, Rory. I think it's time to wrap up, and I just would love to ask you like just a few questions just to close this interview. So the first question is, what is the best piece of career advice that you have received?
Don't be afraid to make change, and to take risks when you're young.
Okay.
When you're a little bit older, that's another story.
Good one. What book would you recommend to our audience?
Yeah, so recently I read like 2 books. So one of them are Rules from Reed Hastings and Ari Meyer. So a really nice book. And another one, Human Accuracy, from Zanini and Hamlet, if I'm not wrong.
Okay, good ones. What's your main passion outside of work?
Football. And I would say also international relations.
Okay, that's pretty good.
I keep awake. Yeah, I keep awake like until 3 a.m. sometimes to watch like my favorite team play in Brazil. So that's a really, a real passion, I would say.
I need to ask this question. What is your favorite football team in Brazil?
Fluminense Football Club.
Okay.
That shares the same colors from Italy flag.
Nice.
So I can send you something.
Okay. Anything that you're specifically learning right now? Is there any knowledge gap that you discover after you decide to move to a new company at a different stage, or something that you were learning before?
So definitely, yes. I think that I'm constantly, let's say, evolving like myself as a professional. So of course I need to close like some gaps in terms of like FP&A knowledge. The basic is there, but that's one thing like important. I also like to work with investors. So basically like investor relations is something also like pretty specific, pretty, let's say, hard to do sometimes as well, because you need to understand like people profiling, you need to understand actually some background situations that are happening as well. And I'm not talking about here, but I'm talking about like general, let's say, market conditions. Okay. So yeah, I think these two areas are like the ones that I need to kind of develop more.
Okay, Rory, it was a pleasure to have you on the show. So if people want to find out more about Yababa, they can check the website. And if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Yeah, so basically just like reach me out by LinkedIn. It's basically, my name is Rory Ribeiro. So Rory Yababa, you should already like find me, because I'm the only Rory at Yababa. So it should be like pretty straightforward. And also it's not like a common name in Brazil, so I'm going to be there.
Okay, pretty cool. Rory, thank you for joining me today. It was a pleasure, and wishing you the best.
Well, thank you very much, Christian. Thank you once again for having me here.